introduction. We're talking with Marione Ingram. Maybe we should start with the beginning. So you were a child during World War II, and your
Right.
family lived in Hamburg.
Yes.
And for
Yes.
people that don't know Hamburg, it's almost like the same weather as Denmark or southern Sweden,
It's
right?
uh, it's Northern Europe. Its neighbor is Denmark. In fact, not from Hamburg, not very far away. You can get on a train and be in Denmark very quickly.
Gotcha. So it's not a tropical location.
Not at all.
And so you were a child, and you mentioned in 43 there was a tremendous bombing of the city of Hamburg. And I'm sorry to admit I didn't know that. I was aware of Dresden. Of course, that's very famous. But it
Yes,
sounds like
because of Kurt Vonnegut's book,
ah,
Slaughterhouse Five. That's what made Dresden famous. But I think it was four times as many people died in Hamburg as in Dresden.
wow.
And Dresden and Hamburg was targeted as a retaliatory method by the Brits and the Americans in retaliation for the Blitz. They singled out only the civilian population, and the neighborhood where we lived was the epicenter of this bombing. So there was nothing that stood, nothing left. It was like the stuff that Netanyahu does in Gaza. It is exactly like that. It's just rubble. The only thing that is not there is the flames. The city was in flames, and it was windy, so the flames just spread. It was a living, if you believe in religious depiction of an afterlife, hell couldn't be worse than that.
And how old were you then?
I was seven and a half,
Seven and
uh,
a half.
in 40 August 43.
I think everybody can remember where they were when they were seven and a half, and this is a horrifying way to spend that time of your life.
Well, I think you tend to grow up in a different way. Up to that point, there had been nothing uh, childhood like in my life. My family was murdered. The night before I turned six, the Gestapo took my grandmother. My mother was hiding my grandmother in our apartment. Uh, Her brother and other family members were killed on the 8th of uh, November 1941. And my grandmother was supposed to be among those people in 1941, about my uncles and family members that I don't even remember or know. So my mother hid my grandmother for 2 years. And then apparently somebody in the apartment building ratted us out or something. So the Gestapo came on the 18th of November, 1941, 40, yeah, 41.
And they took her because she was Jewish.
Yes, yes. They had already confiscated their beautiful apartment and their art and their uh, collection of rare books, among them a first Shakespeare folio. So I would be very rich today if that had been returned to us. So, but my life has never been about money. But still, it would have been nice to have something left that belonged to my grandparents. And the last time I saw my grandmother, um, was on the 8th of November in the evening.
Sorry. Wow. I didn't know this part of your story. I was aware of the bombing, but I didn't know
Yeah.
that it was very
Yeah.
close.
So this is And until 43, as I told you earlier, my mother had to report to the Gestapo every week, which was really an ordeal. And I often went with her. Uh, and uh, and until 43, until the summer of 43, she was not deported to concentration camp because there was a exemption for so-called privileged mixed marriage. And in 43, that was abolished. And so then Jewish spouses who had been exempt from concentration camp were sent. My mother had gotten our deportation order 2 days before the bombing raid. And so we were supposed to report on that day or shortly thereafter or a day before, something to be sent to Theresian stop to be murdered there. And then the bombing happened, and it was so severe. And there were so many burned bodies. There were blackened human bodies all over the place. And my father was in the underground, and he had already begun to suspect that the Nazis were not going to allow Jewish spouses to live. And he had arranged with members of the underground for a hiding place. And our hiding place was outside Hamburg with an elderly communist couple. And this was a big communist underground that was part of the, fight to fight the fascists. Uh, I think I told you that the husband, that they're Pimbers, Mr. and Mrs. Pimber. Mr. Pimber was tortured by the Nazis in 1933. I have never, in our year and a half of hiding on his property, I only saw him a few times, and then he was almost as though he were transparent, without expression or even movement. Uh, and it was almost, he was like almost ghost-like transparency. And I didn't know then that it was because he was so traumatized by the torture that he had lost all whatever will to live, or whatever happens to people who are severely tortured. And Mrs. Pimber didn't like Jews very much. I don't know whether she was anti-Semitic or whether she, it was my mother particularly, or whether she had a crush on my father, who was extremely handsome. And so, but also at some point in the early 40s, my parents decided that my middle sister, who was blonde and looked about as Aryan as she looked the epitome of Aryanism, very, very, platinum, pale blonde hair, light eyes, peachy colored skin. So she was sent to live with the Pimbers. And it was very easy because kids were turning up all over the place. German kids were turning up all over the place in the countryside to get them away from.
So she didn't stand out.
Not at all, and wound up, and the Pimbers, Frau Pimber took her to church and shopping, and as her grandchild, so it was just easy to pass Helga off. And so we wound up there, and I'm a pacifist, and I find it continually ironic that I was saved by the most atrocious bombing at that point. And then, of course, America dropped nuclear bombs in Japan, which was even worse. So,
so you were able to escape Hamburg because of the chaos following the bombings.
And because the bodies couldn't be identified,
Oh.
and because it was the epicenter where we lived, so it could, they were just shoveled together into mass graves. And presumably everybody was convinced that my mother, my sisters, and I were among those.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have been allowed to leave the city. They would have caught you trying to leave the city.
Yeah, had no chance. My grandmother tried to take my uncle, he was murdered when he was 18. My uncle and she were not allowed to go into Switzerland. Got all the way to the Swiss border, and Switzerland wouldn't let them in.
Hmm.
That's what America is doing to people who are fleeing. I have now come to the conclusion with America's support of Israel, I've come to the conclusion that Americans love war. I'm convinced that that's why we are constantly at war. That's why America supports dictators and despots all over the place. I am so angry at everyone in power for not doing what should be done. I think that the fact that we continue to do this and not a single country stands up and says enough. I want everyone, every entity to stop giving money to uh, Israel.
Yeah.
They are killers of children, and we kill children. That means we are killing the future. This is the insanity of it. To me, is so clear, and I don't understand why it is that this does not get
I
through.
wonder if you could talk a little about the your experiences in Mississippi. That you were a young woman and you realized how bad things were, and I guess an opportunity arose for you to go with some people down to Mississippi and help out.
No, well, what happened was I had organized a sit-in on the Atlantic City boardwalk. I think it was 4 days for the Johnson National Convention. And the Mississippi Freedom Democrats had come to Atlantic City and wanted to be seated. And so on the convention floor, in the end, they were offered, I think, 2 seats. And they huddled and said, in the balcony at that, and they huddled and said no. And so, because I was the organizer, Daniel, my husband, had to go back to work. So he left, assured that I would get home.
Hmm.
Uh, the day the sit-ins ended, that day I was going to become a citizen, a naturalized citizen.
Oh.
And so I tried everything I could think of, because at that hour it was, midnight or later, and I couldn't find anybody with a car who was going uh, south. I couldn't find anybody. And then somebody said, go to the Freedom Bus, because they might let you get it, because they stopped in Arlington, which is across the bridge
Hmm.
from DC, and you can get out there. And so I got there, and a young woman, said no, there were no seats. And then Fannie Lou Hamer said she can have my seat. And then I wrote with Fannie Lou Hamer, and we exchanged stories. And I learned a lot about her, and she learned a lot about me. And before the ride to Arlington ended, I promised her that I would go to Mississippi, because she told me that I needed to go to Mississippi and uh, work in Mississippi. So I became a citizen on the 28th of August, 1964, and 2 days later, I went to Mississippi.
Tell us a little bit about your experiences down there. Where did you land and what were you
I,
working
I, I, I lived in Moss Point, and my with an elderly couple, very elderly. He was a deacon of the church,
on?
and they were. She was my mother,
Mm.
and I felt I don't know. I felt like I'd found family.
Mm.
I had no family. I found a heroism in people who risked their lives to register to vote. Um, I was impressed by their hospitality. I mean, these were people, they were not rich, they were not powerful, they didn't have any influence, that they had been subjugated throughout their lives, their ancestors' lives. They had never known anything good about this country, and yet they risked so much by housing us, SNCC workers. And so my job was to register voters, so going to, from house to house, and it was the Johnson Goldwater election. And so we went around uh, trying to register people to vote. And where I met, I think, the most wonderful people in the world. Uh, and they made no distinction between me and themselves,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which was beautiful and welcoming and loving. And so I did that a lot, and got arrested quite a bit, and that was routine. And so then I was also then at some point asked to run a freedom school in
What's a freedom school?
this can
Oh, and this is your book. So, by
can
the
you
way,
see it?
for listeners, if you want to go deeper into these stories, and I bet a lot of you do, Marion wrote a book called The Hands of Peace.
And the Hands of Peace is about the civil rights movement,
Yeah.
and the Hands of War is about my childhood experience in the Holocaust and the war.
And at a certain point, it became too dangerous for you to stay in Mississippi.
I was on election night. I and two friends, young Black women, we were all young women. They both were Black. SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, had a uh, rule that none of us were to engage in trying to integrate any place. We were totally not to do that. And we were all young and, I don't know, maybe impatient for things to change. Uh, and we had finished our work. We had driven people, to register, and we've done everything. The last bit was done, and we were sitting in front of the drugstore. And I said, should we go and, go in there? And the three of us, then we talked about it, and we said yes. And I said, well, one thing we ought to do is we ought to uh, go in and that we ought to order the same thing, rather than, let's make it absolutely clear and simple. And so we decided that we were going to order banana splits. So we were sitting at the counter, and we were told that first they just looked at us, and then they said they wouldn't serve us. No, they wouldn't serve us, and so I had already seen that one of the people behind the counter was talking to somebody who I assume was the manager, and saw him go to the phone. And so I said, we just want to order 3 banana splits, please. And then this person looked at us, and she said, we don't serve N.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of my friends said, we don't want N's, we want banana splits. And at which point we laughed, in this sort of, we had put ourselves in danger, which was obvious at that point that we had put ourselves, in danger. And so we decided, we better get out of there before the police come. But so we were sitting in the car, and we were cracking up because uh, my friend was so quick, in her response. It was so bloody beautiful. And we were sitting there, and we were laughing, and I was driving. And so I was behind the wheel, and the cops came, and my driver's license, all of the usual thing that I always gave them when they arrested me. And then follow me to the station. Followed him, and at the station, this policeman brought me in, and then the one behind the counter at the police station said, what are you charging her with? And he mumbled around a little bit, and then he said, why don't you uh why not speeding? Said the cop who took me in. The guy said, how about adding drunken driving? Said the guy behind the.
Yeah, behind the desk. Wow.
And so, there were three, I can't remember. It was speeding, drunken driving, and something else. And so I was arrested, and spent a little bit of time in the Hoosgow. And then the Legal Guild of New Orleans came to the trial, which took place in a empty sort of auditorium,
Hmm.
a long table, where I sat in front of this long table. The judge was directly across from me. On one side was a woman who was supposed to be the stenographer, and on my right were the three legal guild lawyers. And so we had the trial, and the cops couldn't get their story straight. So the judge proceeded to tell, my uh, atrocious driving and my drunkenness and all of that. And he filled in a little bit more, and also to make it really juicy. The I don't know now. So many things seem so ridiculous. But when he started then to give this testimony against me, I'm not a lawyer, but I knew enough that the judge isn't the
I'm
one who.
not supposed to do that. No.
So I said something to that effect to the lawyer nearest me, and he just told me to hush up, to be quiet. And I kept saying, but that's not right. The judge can't do that. So calm down. And so then I smoked at that point, and like most of us who were smoking, we rolled our own cigarettes. But somebody had brought a carton of cigarettes to me because they knew I was in jail, and so I had this carton of cigarettes during this very lengthy trial. I was told by my lawyers it would last 20 minutes. It lasted several hours.
Wow.
So I opened my cigarettes, and took out a cigarette. And this bloody, I really want to call him a nasty word, judge, because he is a Southern gentleman, lit my cigarette. At which point, of course, I smoked the entire carton of cigarettes to make him light my.
It's
The,
great.
the people in the room were all black. They were all of the people I knew and, who were there at the trial. And when I did that, they just saw that what I was reducing this clown to. Anyway, so I was sentenced to 280 days in jail. And
What?
and I went back to my little cell. They fed me well in this prison.
Okay.
I have to say that. And I did not get abused or anything. So that was also a plus at that point. And so the lawyers then came back, and I said, I want to take this to the Supreme Court because it's obviously a miscarriage of justice. The judge giving the testimony against me, that's not legal. Yeah, it's not legal. What they did is they gave him money, converted the 280 days into dollars. And then they told me I had to leave Mrs. I said, no, I'm going to stay in jail. I want to take this to the Supreme Court. I absolutely want to do that. And they said, if you stay in jail because you've humiliated the judge, you're not going to get out alive. And you have to leave Mississippi because they're going to come and get you. So I had to leave Mississippi, which was the saddest day. So
And you had colleagues that had been killed. So this
oh,
was
yeah,
not a
yeah.
this was not a theory that.
Turner and Goodman were in the next county, in Neshoba County, and they were killed, and the killers were still loose, although, the police knew who the killers were.
So you didn't go to Germany this year, even though everything was set up, just like for the last 8 years, everything went beautifully, positive experience for everybody involved.
They booked the hotel, the flights were booked, everything was done. The teachers had, every teacher had decided their schedule on, when I was to be there and what we were going to do, and the different schools do different things. So yeah, and now they have to redo it. They went through a lot of work.
But
They did a
somebody
lot.
somebody said no, you may not come and do this.
Yes, was the culture, the senator, the minister for culture, was the person who said no because I compared actions in Gaza to um, Nazi Germany. Uh, and I'm not a diplomat. I'm not an expert in anything particular. So I express myself, I guess, very openly and bluntly. And if at the time I said it, it was perhaps not the time to make the comparison,
Hmm.
in certainly not in their eyes, but I make the comparison. I do compare it, and they will probably bar me again because I do compare it because uh, the bombing in retaliation, which we support, he keeps saying it's self-defense. Murdering children is by no means self-defense. So I think the bombing and the lies and the distortions are so reminiscent of uh, my experience in Nazi Germany. And so I do compare it. And when I look at the children in Gaza, I know exactly what they're going through because I went through it. I know exactly how it feels to be hungry or thirsty because I was hungry and thirsty. And
And also
yeah,
to see that level of devastation and to lose family members and the
yeah,
chaos and
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
terror.
And, yeah, and I lucked out. I, just the odd convergence of things, and I'm alive. I'm not, one of the dead in either the bombing or the concentration camps. I survived that, and I survived with parents, which is highly unusual. Most of the people I knew, a Zionist group ran a school outside Hamburg in the ritziest part, along the River Elbe. The Zionists had rounded up all of the children who were still alive from Bergen-Belsen and from everywhere where they could find the children of the Holocaust. And we were in the school in 3 villas along the Elbe. Uh, and the villas belonged to the Warburg banking family.
Mm-hmm.
They had left Germany and gone to America. And actually, the son fought in the American army against Germany. And they gave, the Nazis had those villas, and then the Brits occupation used it, and then the Warburgs gave the villa to this Zionist group, where we were children. Here were all these children with traumatic, with horrific experiences. And my sisters and I were the only ones. No, there was one other girl who had a mother and a father. None of them had parents anymore. They were all orphans. Some of them were so young they didn't know what their name was or where they were born or when they were born. And the Zionist group smuggled kids into Palestine. And I wanted to go, and I'll tell you that story as well. I wanted to go because we were being fed and cared for,
Yeah. And why wouldn't you want to go?
And taught, and the value of trying to create a place for us Jews. And so we were safe. We were traumatized but safe. We were treated with kindness and affection and love. And so I wanted to go, and my parents were not uh, happy about that idea. And so I begged and I pleaded, and finally they agreed that they would meet with the group who was smuggling kids to Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And how as one grows up, has moments where light bulbs sort of pop up. I was sitting on a piano bench, and the Zionists, the 2 women and a couple of men, and my parents. And so there was a discussion between them and my parents. And then one of them said that they needed me, they needed young women like me, intelligent young women. They did say, intelligent young women to produce sons. And at that point, I couldn't believe what I had heard. And at that point, I was 12. And I said, well, I'm not going because that's not why I wanted to go to Palestine. I wanted
Right.
to go for totally other reasons. So my parents had smiles on their faces from ear to ear.
They
I
were
was not
relieved. They were relieved finally.
relieved, totally relieved. My father said that when I was 2 years old, it was evident that I wasn't going to be controlled. Germany is experiencing a hell of a lot of anti-Semitism, both physically violent and verbally violent anti-Semitism. And I told them, I said, I think you can directly lay that at the feet of Netanyahu. there's no other reason. These people most likely were anti-Semites all along, but they held it in check. They didn't dare open it, and after they're gone, their children will be different. Because when I talk to students, I realize how aware they are,
Mhm.
uh, and and I also know that they must just really find the people in power totally insane, and wonder how it's possible. That's when I talk to young people and try to convince them, against, I wish I didn't have to. I try to convince them, to vote for, you know, our warmonger, who's helping uh, Netanyahu kill children.
Could I ask about you go to every day, and maybe we'll end with this because you've been very generous with your time. I really appreciate it. Most days, maybe every day,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
actually go to the
Sometimes
White House.
this week every day. Yeah, yeah. We go to the White House. We didn't go today, and so yeah, we've had some nice big demonstrations. One very big one in early November, I believe, and that is very, very gratifying. And otherwise, it's Daniel and I. And sometimes I think, well, does it really, make a difference? And then I tell myself, well, people ask me, why why are you there? I talk to people, and almost every day people take pictures of us. Every day people take pictures of us. Sometimes lots and lots of people say, may I take a photo? And that's in fact how we met Adam.
Oh,
And it is spreading. And I talked to people, a couple of days ago, to people from Brazil and from Cameroon and from Rwanda. And we talk about what's going on in the world, and everywhere people are fighting. Uh, in Sudan, they're fighting each other. They eat the same food, they have the same religion, they dress the same, and yet they're killing each other. So it is horrific. And so I'm my fight is against injustice and for peace. That's what I'm about, and it's my history that makes makes it important that I speak up, because um, I have history to a lived history, and I'm the last one. So it is a kind of responsibility, and it's not fun. I realize that part of me is still, the person I've. I am still the same person I've always been. I still believe that if I fight hard enough, something good will come of it. And I have proof of that. The civil rights movement, Mississippi.
this book's on its way because it's the whole South African
No, I'm going
complaint.
to take it with me, because I was criticized for the comparison I made, and Daniel just came across a newspaper article when I was in Germany, and the headline, which of course they must have loved, was that I had made a heavy critique of America. So we are going to take that back and see, you're not the only one I'm criticizing. Let's talk again sometime.
For sure.